if we're going live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to What Is It Wednesday from the sort of new headquarters of the Barnes Museum. Traditionally, this program has always been a traveling program. I mentioned last week during our first episode that the What Is It program started in 1981. And we'd been traveling to schools and retirement communities, preschools, colleges, everything like that. And it's amazing to me that I'm presenting it from my basement. So please excuse the ping pong table in the back. But we're very excited that we can still bring it to you this week. Thank you everyone for watching last week. We had like 2,000 views almost from last week. We hope you enjoyed it and we hope you continue to share it while we practice distance learning. But most importantly, over everything else, we hope that everyone is safe and healthy. And we at the Barnes Museum would like to thank our educators and our students as they work very hard to transition into distance learning. So we hope this can bring a little bit of education to you, and we do hope you enjoy it. But again, welcome to What Is It Wednesday for the Barnes Museum. I am Bonnie. I'm the caretaker curator at the museum, and today I'm kind of excited about today's topic. Last week was what is the Barnes Museum? And I had mentioned that the Barnes Museum, we have artifacts from the 1740s all the way through artifacts from 1973, when the very last person to live in the house, this little boy right here, Bradley Barnes, passed away at the age of 90. He had lived in Southington his whole life, and he had been in the house himself from 1910 to 1973. And he left the house and all of its contents to the town of Southington to be run as a museum and library. So 40 some odd years later, here we are. Excuse me, I'm going to check my phone. I see some posts and things coming out, and I just want to make sure that I'm not missing any questions or whatnot. Here we go. Aha, now it's off. Now I can see questions as they come in. So if you have any questions, please let us know. I'd be more than happy to answer them. And later this video will be up on YouTube for those who have family members or friends who do not have Facebook. Feel free to go ahead and share it. So today's topic, what was life like in the 1800s? I think I have so many different favorite parts of this collection in this museum, but one of them, as I mentioned last week, is these everyday items that we have, those items that all of us take for granted, those little talcum leaves that I said that were used for shaving and were put on your face, those things that we just toss away. We toss away so many things in our society today, are still preserved at this museum. So I wanted to bring those everyday objects because they really speak to the daily life and the rituals that we have that we don't even think about every day. And everybody wonders, right? Everybody wonders what life was like before they were born. For some of you who are Star Trek fans, I'm sure you wonder what life will be like in the future and whatnot, if you're anything like me as well. But I certainly do have passion for the past. And we find this sense of wondering what things were like when we weren't there, wishing we were a fly on the wall. Recently, a post went viral about last year, a purse was found in between a locker and a wall in Ohio, and the contents of the purse got to tell the family members of their recently deceased family member what her life was like in the 1950s as a teenager, and they treasured those little memories, a time that they didn't necessarily know about her. So, but stuff like that goes viral. Netflix and Hulu have series like The Toys That Make Us, the 70s, the 90s, the 80s series that are there. We can think about the past and we can think about these times, and if we say certain time periods, like if I were to say the 1950s, culturally what comes to mind? You know, we've got poodle skirts, we've got those little drive-up restaurants with the trays that go on the windows. We've got 1950s cars that I think are absolutely fabulous. If I were to say medieval times, you'd think of knights and of the Round Table and King Arthur and sword fighting and maybe Robin Hood or something, I don't know. And then Victorian times bring up different images, beautiful gardens, federal style buildings, Greek revival with columns and beautiful architecture. So many of these images are cultural references because technology changes over time, as does science, and all of that changes how we live. And the Barnes Museum, as many historic house museums throughout New England and the world show, is how the material culture changes over time. So what is in the Barnes Museum that shows these cultural changes, and how can this show us about what life was like in the 1800s and in Southington, Connecticut? And here are some of these fun little items to show you. First off, when we present this program to students in schools, I love to ask them, what is the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning? And they're like, well, we get up. And I'm like, okay, well, wait a minute. When you get up, is it dark outside? And they say, well, yeah, in the winter, it's dark outside. Okay, great. So what do? They're like, oh, well, we turn on a light. Sorry, can't do that necessarily in the 1800s. Can't click on a light, don't have the type of electricity that we have now. What would you have done? And we try to make them critically think, these students for the What Is It program, critically think and walk them through a day in the life. And we bring items that show how life has changed. In particular, when we talk about the lights, we bring this object right here. This is a candle mold, and this is a 6 candle mold. And we have a few of these at the museum. This is the smaller one. And this you would hold like this with a handle right here. And you would put the wicks all the way through these holes, so they would come out the bottom holes right here. And then you would pour in the wax, and which you would make yourself, and you'd let it cool and then slide the candles out when you were all done. The Barnes Museum family, the house was built in 1836. So in 1836, there was no electricity in the house. They were making their own candles. They were making their own soap. Grandma Sylvia, the matriarch of the family, she even brewed her own beer. We've got bottles of that and everything still. I wouldn't drink it now, but we've still got it. Speaking of soap, so we've got candle molds, something that we don't necessarily find in stores today. We're not making candles all the time. Some of us have these as fun decorations in our house, I'm sure. But you don't readily find these if you go to Target or Walmart. But speaking of soap, we have another item right here. And this is a soap saver. I'm going to come a little bit forward here so you can take a peek at this. I love this. Again, one of these everyday objects that you and I would just take for granted. Soap. We purchase soap. We have soap and we just go to the store and we grab it. And then when it gets to be a tiny little size, what do most of us do? When it gets to be about this size, most of us, if you're anything like me, you drop it in the drain and you let it kind of fall through the drain when it's done. And you don't use it and you get a bigger piece because how could this possibly help wash anything? But if you're making your own soap in the 1800s, you would not be throwing away these little pieces. You spent so much time and energy making this soap that you wanted to use every single snippet of it that you possibly could. So you would put it in this little soap saver right here, and you would gather it with all your other smaller pieces of soap, and you would lock it with a little lock portion, and then you could hold on to the handle and you would put this piece in the water. Once this piece is in the water, you would shake it around and this would make the water all soapy. So you were able to use every last bit of the soap that you spent all that time making. It's a resource, when you spend all this time making something, you want to make sure you can use every last bit of it. Archaeologists see this all the time when prehistoric people of Connecticut would use stone tools. They would use resources that were readily available to them, kind of waste-like. They'd honk off a big piece of it, and then it would just stay on the ground. But if it was a rare resource, something that they couldn't find naturally in Connecticut, they would use every last little bit of it. It's just human nature. We work very hard for a resource and we want to use it all. But when it's readily available, we're using it a little bit more wastefully. All these jokes that I'm seeing on Facebook right now with all the toilet paper, it's we used to just use toilet paper and be able to go and get it at the store, and now some people are out of toilet paper. So I hope that you're not one of those people, but you can see that difference. Another everyday object that you might not necessarily find is our shoes, like this. These shoes are incredibly tiny. For one, the members of the Bradley Barnes family were very, very small. But these shoes in particular, they're made of beautiful green fabric, and they are buttoned up on the side. They have 9 beautiful buttons all the way on the side. This was before Velcro. This was before ties and laces. The button was the technology of choice for clasping things together. But if you have all of these buttons, and you in particular had leather shoes, sometimes getting those buttons through leather shoes was very, very difficult. So you would use something called a button hook. And perhaps some of you brides out there have had wedding gowns with buttons all the way up the back, and you perhaps would have used these. Now I have clean, dry hands right now, which is why I'm touching all of these. I just washed and dried my hands. But this is a button hook. And we love to bring this to the kids because they think that when we show them this button hook, that this is something that a dentist might use, that this is something to clean their teeth. I've had children ask me if this is something that someone in Egypt used for mummification. Totally not. This is a simple little old button hook, and how it works is you would put it inside the hole of the button. You'd grab the button and you'd be able to pull the button right on through. So again, like say you had a little hole like this, you'd pull it through, grab the button, and come right through. And that's a little button hook. Again, things that you don't readily easily find at Walmart and Target. Same as this object right here. Love this object. I'm sure some of you know what this is. I'm sure some of you have used this in the past. This wonderful object right here is a rug beater, and no vacuums, no to suck up all the dirt and dust. You would pick up your rugs, you would bring them outside, and you would beat this up against the rug incessantly, and until your rug was dust free, and then you could bring it back into the house nice and tidy and clean and leave all of the dust outside. Now, when we're able to come back out and visit the Barnes Museum again, there are some unique features of the house. And as you walk through, all the floors are original, they're quartered oak, and you'll see these beautiful little buttons on the floor. It almost looks like a snap was hammered down into the wood part of the floor. Well, in essence, that's exactly what it is. They're rug holders. It's almost like a non-slip rug technology. Things we don't buy in the store today. We go off and we get those rolls of sticky mesh and we put it on the floor under our rug, and then the rug goes on. So when the dog goes running across the floor, or your kids go running across the floor, the rug doesn't slide. But that technology hadn't been invented yet. So in the 1800s, they were using these carpet snaps. And you would sew one side of the snap into the rug, and then you would hammer the other side into the floor, and then you would press those together, and the rug would stay nice in place. So we have dozens of those all throughout the house, which is wonderful. Some of you kids are at home, and well, all of you kids are at home, and you're playing games. You might have taken out toys that you haven't taken out in years because you're bored. And I hope many of you are, doing homework and whatnot as well. But when you do have some downtime, I'm sure your toys look a little different than some of the toys at the Barnes Museum. In particular, I wonder if you have those viewfinders that I had when I was a kid. And those little red or orange viewfinders, you'd put the little paper disc in it with the negatives, and you'd click the side, and it would go from picture to picture to picture to picture. Well, before that technology had been invented, they had this beautiful piece right here. This is called a stereoscope. And I'm very carefully going to pick this up. This beautiful stereoscope right here is almost like a viewfinder, and you would look in. You can almost see our reflection through the glass eye plates right there, and you would look at this cardboard piece. It has two images of the same picture, so when you look through here, it almost gives a 3D image, and it's like you're staring at a place in person, which is very, very neat. With many items that we have at the Barnes Museum, we also have diary entries that go with a lot of these items. So we know when the items came into the house. We might have the box something came in, the extra parts, the catalog it was ordered from. Again, stuff I discussed in our last video. But with this stereoscope in particular, we have a beautiful diary entry from Emma Bradley. So Bradley Barnes is that little boy right here. Emma was his aunt. And on December 21st of 1873, she writes in her diary, "Mr. Lester gave me a stereoscope and views for a Filipina present." So it gives a lot of in-depth information, the Barnes Museum collection, as to what we have in the house. Another item that we have on the table is this fun little bug. Again, we love bringing this to elementary schools in particular. They're like, what is this crazy little bug? What are we looking at? This bug right here is a match holder. I'll show you the bottom. And you can see with the light right here, it's ribbed right here. You can open up his wings. The matches would sit right inside, and then we would close it, flip it over, and you could strike the match on his underbelly, and that would be a little match holder. Now, matches, not something that all of us necessarily carry around anymore. For those people who smoke, we have, there are lighters and whatnot now, but that was before lighters had been invented. So people were carrying around matches. They were lighting candles all the time. They were lighting gas torches to light the house if their house had that type of technology. So they would have unique, fun items to hold their matches. We have a question coming in. Somebody said, do you have a recipe for Grandma Sylvia's beer? Funny you should ask about the recipe for the beer. The beer in particular, I do not know if we have a recipe for that, but we have many cookbooks and recipes from the diaries for the house. Absolutely fascinating, because again, talking about technology, cooking has changed. I almost did today's segment from my kitchen so we could talk about this a little bit. It's a typical kitchen, right? I've got a counter and a sink and a stove and it's glass top and whatever. Well, that's technology of today. And when I want to bake something in the oven or I want to cook something, I can set it to 350, and the electricity brings it right up to 350 degrees perfectly. And I know exactly how long to bake it for, and everything comes out perfect every time. Maybe. But back in the 1800s, all that technology had not been invented. We have and I'll post this in the comment section later today, underneath this. We have a beautiful cast iron gas stove from 1883 at the Barnes Museum. And a lot of the recipes that we have talk about cooking on that stove. And the recipes will say, put all the ingredients together, put it in the oven, cook till done. because each person who was cooking had to know their own stove. They had to learn how to cook from their mothers and their aunts and their grandmothers before them. And they needed to understand what their stove was like with a different fuel that they used, either the coal or the gas or the wood. And they'd kind of find out the little idiosyncrasies of their stove, and they would be able to cook their meals. So cook till done. And then the diary entries would say, Mama was very successful today. She cooked 8 meatloaves and it was very successful. Or Mama wasn't as successful today cooking. And it would be like, ooh, that was a bad day. Maybe cook till done went a little awry. So there was that. I have a photograph right here. And this photograph is an item that we cannot travel with at the Barnes Museum, of course. One, because we don't have this item, but it's a huge part of our history. Bradley Barnes was obsessed with technology. And again, as technology changed in his lifetime, he went from a lifetime of, or a lifestyle of horse and carriages. He has toys to reflect that. We'll look at those next week. All the way through automobiles. And when automobiles came into play, Bradley, he really fell in love with the automobile industry. This is a picture of Bradley in his 1908 Pope Hartford runabout. Now, at the museum, in his bedroom, we have a beautiful picture of his 1912 Pope Hartford Roadster. And the reason why we keep that on display, even though we don't have the vehicle, is because of what Bradley did with the car and how important it is to our history and the collection. He traded in, I think, 2 cars in order to get the Pope Hartford. And he had that he had the Pope Hartford, the 1912, from 1912 to his death in 1973. And then he decided, per his will, that he was going to give that to AAA in West Hartford. He did that because he was one of the charter members of AAA Board of Directors. So once social distancing is over and once we're able to get back into our normal groove of things, if you ever get a chance, go up to the AAA office in West Hartford. As you walk in, there's a beautiful glass vestibule, and on your left-hand side, there is Bradley Barnes's Pope Hartford. She's indigo blue, she's one of a kind, has all the bells and whistles. She's absolutely lovely. I highly recommend it. And then the last thing that I have on the table for today are the dishes. Now, these dishes are not part of the Barnes Museum collection. I didn't feel comfortable traveling with Bradley Barnes's china, so that is tucked safely away at the Barnes Museum still, but this is my china. And I brought this out because of the history of Southington, and this is how kind of life and material culture changes. When Southington first became established in 1779, we started off as a kind of an annex of Farmington. We're called Southington because we're south of Farmington. And we started off as a farming community, all agriculture. And then in 1721, we asked for something called winter privileges. We asked for a minister to come and preach to our community during the winter so we wouldn't have to go all the way up to Farmington to go to church. It was a successful experiment, and again in 1779 we became established as our own town. We continued in agriculture, but then industrialization came in, and when industrialization hits New England towns, it changes everything. It changes how the family unit functions, and it changes material culture indefinitely. In particular, with dishes, with dining, with where people live. There's this great map at the museum from 1878, and it's a bird's eye chart of downtown Southington. And what you can see is what many of you will see all throughout New England towns. All the larger, more prominent families' homes are closer to downtown. Why? Because in the 1800s, it was better for the family and for the industry owners to live closer to their businesses. And then their wives and their daughters were running their social circles, and they were preparing meals. They were helping out their families' businesses through their social contacts. And meals were a big part of that. So we see at the Barnes Museum a vast collection of dishes. And you can see how time changes through those dishes. From when, in 1836, when the house was first built, it wasn't a big booming industrial owner's home. He was kind of finding his way, Eamon Bradley. But by the end, we have all the little nuances of a social elite house, someone who was very prominent in society, and the dishes are part of that. So as you sit down for your Thanksgiving dinner or your Easter dinner, or virtually, I hope, and you set up all these different dishes, think about how life has changed. Let's see, what do I want to talk? Because I know we only have a couple minutes left. It's such a fun topic. We could go on forever. But that beautiful map of 1878 shows how Southington has changed, because industrialization comes in, and then, as we know, in at least our hometown of Southington today, the houses have grown over all throughout into the annexes and the edges of Southington, and you're able to see how much of that agriculture isn't here anymore. We're very thankful for the agriculture we have as well, with places like Leaf. So the Barnes Museum is, again, unique because of the everyday objects that it has. It's not so much about having all the objects, it's about understanding the truth of what history was like by looking at the oral record, the written record, and the objects around, kind of putting it all together. And when you go to not only the Barnes Museum, but again, other historic house museums, other museums throughout the country and the world like this, you're able to get another little snippet of what life might be like, and then you're able to put all this information together to figure out if you can satiate your curiosity as to what life was like in the past when you didn't live there. So I thank you very, very much for joining us today. Thank you for joining me in my game room. I'm very excited about next week's episode. It's all about fun and games, and we're going to be looking at the board games and the different fun activities that the Barnes family kept in their collection and how they passed their time. And while you're waiting for next week's episode, please go online at thebarnesmuseum.org as we add the board games to an online exhibit on our website. And also make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all those fun things, because we have Songs of the Steinway. We're not going to do it today. We're doing What Is It Today? But starting up again tomorrow, we'll have Songs of the Steinway every single day. So thank you for joining us and for your patience during this time as we bring this to you in a little different way. We hope you are all safe and well, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.